how our methodologies and our thoughts about behaviors and think about things have really shaped psychology. Okay? So at the end of this conversation, or this class, we should be really talking about some interesting things. Alright, so let's get started. We're really going to focus on just these two women. Okay? Mary Calkins, she was really cool. Alright, she studied underneath William James. We talked about William James on Wednesday, right? The thing about Mary Calkins, she actually didn't go into psychology. She started out in Greek philosophy. And they asked her if she wanted to understudy in psychology, which for a woman in those days was a huge, huge, huge opportunity. So she did her research about who she wanted to understudy with, and she found James. And James was very excited about this. Okay, so James was like, yeah, come on, this is going to be great. But there was a lot of controversy with this. Okay? When she went to Harvard, the president of Harvard did not want her to do this. Okay? So it took a lot of pressure from not only Calkins, but Calkins' father, and also James himself. Okay? Finally, the president allowed it, and Calkins went and enrolled in classes, in James' classes. And when the male students found out about this, they all withdrew. Okay? And so this was actually a good thing for Mary because she was able to understudy James privately and got him one-on-one, which is, I think, pretty awesome. So that's the story about Mary getting to study underneath James. Now, she did do enough work to get her doctorate, but at the time of those days, Harvard has not yet given a doctorate to a woman yet, and therefore they did not give one to her. So she officially never got her doctorate, even though she did all the work. This was fought for a while, not only by her, but colleagues, and even today people, still talk about it, and they never ever granted her doctorate. But she did become the first woman president of the American Psychological Association. Has anybody heard of APA citations? That's American Psychological Association, okay? So she became the president of that, and that's pretty awesome, the first woman to do so. So let's move on. And she also did some other great things. I don't want to forget about this. She was the first woman to set up a psychological laboratory to do, experimental psychology, which is awesome. She also published over 100 articles. That's awesome. Okay? So she was very influential. Then we have Margaret Washburn. She studied with Titchener. You guys remember Titchener from Wednesday? Okay? So that's another great understudy there. She became the first woman to officially be granted a PhD. That's pretty fantastic. And she was the second woman president of the American Psychological Association. So those are very influential women. Here's a picture of Calkins. And here is Washburn. And for some odd reason, my slides got messed up, but so I'm going to move forward and then move back. Here's some contemporary women in psychology. So we see how much they contribute to stuff now. You will also mention quite a few more women who contributed to psychology, but like I said, we're just going to focus on those two. So let me go back, because guess what we're going to talk about? Freud! Everybody loves Freud, right? We love Freud. Okay, he was that crazy person that came up with all these awesome ideas that we built upon and then we bumped, right? Okay, Freud is amazing. First of all, let me give you some background on Freud. Freud started out in medicine. He was actually studying, or he worked with patients who had neurological disorders, like paralysis. Okay, and it didn't have to be full body paralysis, it could be the limbs, whatever extremities. But when he was working with these patients, he found that many of them didn't have a medical reason for their paralysis. What? Like, why the hell is your leg not moving? Okay? And he couldn't figure out why, biologically. But then he started to see that there might have been some psychological factors with it. Okay? There was psychology going on there. Why were they dealing with these paralysis issues, okay? And that's when he started really developing his theories of psychology, okay? And that's what really led to the notion of the unconsciousness, okay? He felt that much of our human behavior is determined by our consciousness. And what do I mean by that? mean that we are influenced, our behaviors and things like that are influenced on things that we aren't aware of. Okay? So these people had this paralysis due to conflicts that they were dealing with in their unconsciousness, but they weren't aware of it. Okay? So they couldn't work through it. And so that's the unconsciousness, the level of being unaware is the level of consciousness. And these conflicts, which Freud said was mostly dealing with sexual conflicts, okay, that they would provide psychological discomfort, could lead to psychological disorders, and things like that, okay? And from this, we developed psychoanalysis. Has anybody ever heard of psychoanalysis? Does anybody know the definition of psychoanalysis? Right, see? I mean, that happens. But psychoanalysis is simply a method that attempts to bring the contents of the unconsciousness to the consciousness. Right? So we can work it out. Has anybody ever heard of talk therapy before? A few of us, right? Okay, that has the notion here that we are going to talk things out so we can figure out what's going on and conflicting in the unconsciousness and bring it to the consciousness. Okay, that's the notion. Let's see here. He also studied the symbolism in dreams. Okay, because we're unconscious when we're in dreams. And he said that the conflicts that we're having in our consciousness came out through our dreams. It was our unconsciousness trying to tell us how to work through things. And so he studied the symbolism of dreams. So that way he could figure out what was going on, bring it to our awareness, into our consciousness, and we could work through it. Alright, so do I have any questions about how Freud thought our brain worked? Yes?
Well, when you introduced him, you said that he brought forth many concepts we use and then debunked. If that's the case, why is he still important today?
Because he provided us the foundation of these ideas. And we were able to build upon this foundation and work upon it. And yes, we have, really proven a lot of this series is not true. We're going to talk about this one, okay? How it's not really, we have some problems, we have some issues with it. But what he did is, even with all the sexual studies and things like that, what he did is he provided this basis for us to build upon. And if we hadn't done that, who knows where we would be right now in where our studies and stuff are. So we really, really provided a groundwork for us. Okay, and that's why it's so important. Okay, so let's move forward. Because I'll tell you what, no one else found out about the consciousness and consciousness before he did. Alright, so let's move forward. And let's go to Watson. Let's talk about behaviorism. And what is the study of behaviorism? It's so easy. We study how we behave, right? I mean, so easy. Us psychologists, we try to be as easy as we can. Okay, I'm just kidding. Anyway, so Watson, he was like, I don't know if I totally agree with this consciousness kind of thing of Freud. Okay? He felt like this did not explain how we behave. Okay? So he came up with behaviorism. And it focuses on how observable environmental stimuli affect our behavioral responses. Okay? So you guys are reacting behaviorally to me lecturing to you, right? Taking notes, you're listening, and things like that. This is your environment. You're being stimulated in a certain way in your environment to behave in a certain way. Right? Now, if I turn off all the lights and I play a movie, some of you guys might fall asleep. Some of you are right now. But some of you guys might fall asleep. Some of you guys might sit there and Facebook and things like that. But I'm not looking at you, so your environment changed. Okay? Your stimuli is changing. So you act differently. Right? Okay, so we can see how this comes about. Watson also believes that all behaviors are learned. Okay? But there isn't biological factors that determine our behaviors. We learn all of our behaviors. It's all nurture. Okay? Okay. So then Skinner went on with that idea as well. His research emphasized how behavior is shaped by the consequences that follow that. He was saying that we do things in order to have positive consequences. Okay? Such as when you go to the grocery store and you buy a candy bar, you usually pay for that candy bar because you don't want to get caught and go to jail, right? Because that would be a negative consequence. Not saying you go to jail for a candy bar, you might have to. But you don't want to do that. Okay, because it's negative. Those consequences are fueling your behavior to go ahead and pay for that candy bar. Okay? Just as some of you guys are taking notes in this class, I see a lot of you guys taking notes. Okay? And you are doing that because you're hoping that you have a positive outcome and you're able to study better and get better grades. Right? Okay, so we can see how these outcomes influence our behaviors. And that's what Skinner is saying shapes our behaviors. Okay, these outcomes, these motivations to do things that have positive things happen to us. Let's see here. He argued that mental processes were of no scientific value in explaining our behavior. Okay, that we shouldn't study the cognitive processes and things like that, because it didn't matter. It was all about this motivation of having these positive outcomes. Okay? Alright. We also see that behaviorism dominated psychology in the 1960s. Okay, and I point that out because we're going to see a trend or a shift in the way that we focus and emphasize different schools of thought in psychology moving forward. Okay? Alright, do I have any questions so far? So here is Mr. Watson. Alright, let's go on to cognitive approaches. Yes, sorry.
Okay, what all of this do in our credit book, like the visualization?
Yeah, it's all in your textbook.
Okay,
It's the first chapter. Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, we're still in chapter 1. Okay, so now we're moving a little bit forward, and we're seeing that, behaviorism cannot explain all of our motivations for our behavior. Okay? The consequence thing is not really working out. We can't explain everybody's behavior for that, because guess what? Some people still do crime. So why do they do that? Because there's still some negative aspects of that. They just didn't explain it all to us. So Miller comes out in 1957, and he starts launching the cognitive revolution. Okay, so we're starting a shift from the behaviorism kind of focus now onto the cognitive focus. Okay? And from that we have cognitive psychology. And this is simply the study of how we remember, how we think, how we learn. You guys have heard all the studies about who learns how and things like that, right? You have your visual learners, your audio learners, hands-on, the different techniques of teaching, all that fun stuff. But why? Okay? Why are some of you guys a visual learner? Some of you guys learn better by hearing. Some of us learn better by, being hands-on and things and actually doing it. Why? That's a good question, right? So we start studying it. What makes the differences there? And also out of this came information processing theory, sorry. So we start getting into computers, right? Okay? So this sounds like a computer, right? Information processing theories doesn't sound like something that would be tied with your mind and being in psychology and stuff, but it is. Because what they're saying here is that your mind, or your brain acts or runs like a computer. Okay? It receives codes, and then interprets these codes. Okay? Processes these codes. It will save relevant information that you need. And then later on, when you need to remember that information, it will bring back that required information for you. Just like a computer, right? I mean, think as simple as a Word document. You write your paper in, okay, the computer is receiving certain codes when you hit the keyboard, right? You're typing in all your stuff, it's processing it for you, okay? You save it, and then later on when you need to go back to it and print it off and everything else comes back. So we're saying that's how the brain works. It's cognitive psychology for saying that. So in the 80s, they started joining forces with neuroscientists who study how the brain works, okay? Computer scientists and philosophers. That makes sense, right? It makes a lot of sense. And then in the 1990s, we saw the emergence of cognitive neuroscience. Okay? And this was a field where they studied, brain tissue and nerves and, how the nervous system and everything else works and is the underlying cause of thoughts and feelings and behaviors and things like that. Okay? Do I have any questions? Good. Alright, so this is Miller here. I can put a face there. Alright, so let's talk about social psychology. We are starting to get into the different types of psychology here, guys. In social psychology, we like to talk about how the others influence our behaviors. Okay? Very interesting, right? Because we're not alone all the time, are we? I'm influencing your behavior right now. Kind of already talked about it. You're influencing my behavior right now. Right? If you guys are all up and throwing paper at each other, and I saw paper airplanes flying everywhere, I probably wouldn't be acting like this, would I? Yeah, I'd probably be acting a little bit different. Okay? So we see a difference here. If I, just put up the slides and just sat here and stared at you, you would probably act a little bit different too. I'm not really teaching you anything. I'm not, trying to help you understand the information here. So how would you guys respond to that? Okay, so we're seeing how others influence our behaviors. How often has your best friend influenced you in doing something? It's been a few times, right? I'm sure you guys can think of plenty. Okay? So we see how social psychologists like to see how others impact our own behaviors. Okay? So we have our pioneering researchers, Albert, Ash, and Lewin. And what they did is they found and they emphasized a scientific, experimental approach to understanding how people are influenced by others. So they created a methodology to study this. Okay? It wasn't just observing and stuff like that. They actually created a methodology, which created this sub-view. Okay? So social psychology focuses on the power of situations and on the way people are shaped through their interactions with others. Okay? And this really started to begin during and after World War II. What happened during World War II?
PTSD.
What was the big event that happened during World War II? I'm sorry? The Holocaust, guys. Okay, so the Holocaust. So what made these normal Poles and Austrians and Germans and everything, all these normal people kill these innocent men, women, and children? What made that happen? And that became a really big study. Is evil a part of human nature? That was a question that they started to ask. Why were these people who were normal, who never committed any crimes, never wanted to kill anybody or anything like that before, why all of a sudden are they starting to kill these innocent men, women, and children? And that's when they really started to study the impact of others on our own behaviors, thoughts, and beliefs. Okay. So this is Lewin for you guys. He founded modern social psychology, okay? And he pioneered the experimentation to test these theories. So that's why he's pretty cool and important. Alright, so let's move on to how science informs psychological therapy. Okay? Therapy is really cool. Is anybody interested in going into counseling or being a therapist or anything like that? I'll tell you what, it's a pretty fun job. Okay, because that's what I did. You run into a lot of interesting things. Okay, it's pretty great. You never have a day that's the exact same as the last. But anyway, Carl Rogers and Abraham Maslow, they pioneered a humanistic approach to the treatment of psychological disorders. Okay, this is very much needed, right? Because we saw PTSD coming out, depression, all these other kind of, disorders coming about. How do we treat them? How do we make them better? And this is something that they pioneered. Excuse me. They focused on behaviorism. We wanted to modify behavior. Okay? Because if you have, let's say, depression, you have certain behaviors, right? You're probably blue. Feeling down. You might feel that you don't really have anybody, that, no one likes you or no one cares about you kind of thing. You might stay isolated, stay in your house, not go out or anything like that. Those are certain behaviors that we associate with depression. And they're not always positive behaviors, right? So we want to modify them. And so behaviorism gave us the theories and foundations to be able to start looking at how to modify behaviors, okay? And then we had Zach who came in, who developed cognitive therapies to correct our faulty thinking, okay? Because if you have depression, you may have a big feeling, and you may have friends and things like that, but you're sitting there thinking, no one cares about me, no one likes me, they're just, talking to me because they have to, kind of thing. And those aren't always correct thoughts. So with these cognitive therapies, we like to correct those thoughts, okay? And make them right, because your negative thoughts probably lead into more depression. All right, and then we also move to drugs. Okay, we've seen a big shift in drug therapies. Okay, but with that, we are able to help alter brain physiology. Okay, balance out chemicals in your brain to help reduce some of these symptoms and really treat some of these psychological disorders. You guys see commercials for them all the time, such as Latuda for bipolar, right? Zoloft for depression. Okay, we see all these kinds of things. All right, and we owe this to understanding the biological and environmental basis. So we've taken both sides of the nature versus nurture debate. And we know that we need both sides to really lead to effective treatments, okay? We also really need it because not every single treatment is effective for every single one, right? Okay, you and your best friend may deal with depression, and she may be maybe prescribed Zoloft and therapy once a month, and you may just get therapy every 2 weeks. Okay, it works great for you. Your therapists work great for you, but they're not the same, right? So we have to look into the biology and the environment and how they impact each other individually for us individuals in order to create these effective treatments. We'll get into this more at the end of the semester. Okay, that'll be a lot of fun. All right, so let's get into 1.3 in your text. And we're going to identify recent developments in psychological science and distinguish between subfields of psychology, because there are a lot of things that you can go into as a psychologist. Right? It's just not counseling. It's a lot of different things. Alright, so in the last 2 decades, we've seen a tremendous growth in our understanding of the biological basis of mental activities. Okay? We've been able to study the brain. We understand genes, or we're starting to understand genes, and how they impact our behaviors and our disorders and things like that. Okay? For the first time in the history of the discipline, we are understanding the full power of biology and its effects on our psychological phenomena. Okay? That's fantastic, right? We're starting to understand how the chemicals in our brain interact with each other and create certain behaviors or feelings or emotions and things like that. Okay? We're able to develop drugs to help balance it out. Alright? We're able to start seeing the different sections of our brain and how we are impacted by the environmental stimuli, or how, music might make some parts of our brains light up compared to others. We are understanding different ways that people who have psychological disorders, their brains function compared to those who don't. Okay? Has anybody ever seen the brain scan of a serial killer compared to that of a non-psychopath? Has anybody seen that before? Pretty interesting. And let me tell you about that. What they did was, when they started getting into all these brain scans and everything, they wanted to see how people's brains reacted to different stimuli. And so they took psychopaths, mostly serial killers. Okay, they wanted to see how they reacted to these gory, traumatizing, images compared to people who were not psychopaths. Okay? And it was amazing because when they did these brain scans, the people who were not psychopaths, their brains lit up and were off the map. Okay? They were so stimulated by these images that, it was pretty crazy. But these serial killers and these psychopaths, when they saw these images, nothing. It was just like normal activity. Okay? And that showed us something. Okay? That taught us stuff in the psychology field. So it's really cool that we can do this. Another thing that we're starting to study is the chemicals in the brain when we meet somebody. Right? Have you ever heard, we've got chemistry? This is what we're referring to. Okay, it's chemistry in our brains. How is that working to make us attracted to somebody or feel those butterflies and things like that? Okay, we're starting to understand those things. Has anybody ever seen the documentary? It was on sex and how we're attracted to mates and things like that. It was like a 3 or 4 part documentary. They did all kinds of experiments. They studied pheromones. They studied how we choose our mates based on level of attractiveness. I might have to provide a link on Blackboard once we get that. But these are some interesting things that we go through, and we're starting to study. All right, so let's talk about brain chemistry. We have learned a lot about brain chemistry. I've already talked about it a little bit. They used to think that we only had a few substances in our brain, a few chemicals that, played into our behaviors and things like that. But we are starting to learn that there are, hundreds of substances that play critical roles in the way that we behave and react in our mental activities. Okay? We are also starting to see, which we'll mention again here in a little bit, we're starting to see that there's different sections of the brain that are responsible for certain ways that we think and behave and our emotions and things like that, but we also know that there's a lot of them working together to create certain outputs, such as our behaviors. Okay, so it's simple, but then it's also very complex. So we'll get into it. But the brain chemistry has really taken a step further in the way that we understand how our brain works. Okay, so let's do the neuroscience. We've had a huge, rapid, dramatic increase of our knowledge in neuroscience and how it affects psychology. Okay, like I said, localization of function. We know that some brain areas are important for specific feelings, thoughts, actions, blah, blah, blah. We also know that there's certain brain chemicals that are, to blame for these kind of things as well. But we also know now, by being able to study these things and really getting into this field, that our brain works together to produce behavior, mental activity, a lot of functions to do that. Okay, it's not just specific ones. Because if it was specific, we could probably treat a lot of things really easily, right? But we see these huge roadmaps of regions going across our brains of ways that they work together. Okay? We see it in addiction. Okay? One hemisphere of your brain, really likes the addiction and things like that. And it's really hard to explain without drawing it out. But your brain has created a barrier where your body is starting to get used to the substance and everything else, and you need that addiction, and you need that substance, and now it becomes part of your brain chemistry. Okay? And you see all these interactions, and it's hard to break it. Okay, to break that addiction. That's why we see a lot of relapses and things like that, because it's not just behavior. We're also dealing with brain chemistry there. Okay? Do you have any questions? I hope I didn't throw you off with that, but. Alright. Also, it was for neuroscience in 1990. That was pretty recent, right guys? 30 years ago. We're declared as a decade of the brain. So that's how recent these studies are. Okay, so let's talk about the human genome. And with this, we talk about the genetic code. Okay? Who has ever heard of alcoholism having a gene? Okay, we've started seeing that pretty recently, right? Okay? And that's because we're being able to start studying the genetic code. Okay? We're starting to see how genes are affecting our behaviors and our disorders and things like that. I did a study about, it's probably been 7-8 years ago on schizophrenia. And in my research, I found that they had identified 2 different genes that were mutated in schizophrenics that could imply for their diagnosis of schizophrenia. Okay? Now, don't let me lead you on believing that there's just one gene that creates a problem. Okay? There's a multiple factors of genes and mutations and other things that create these disorders. Okay? Just like, who's heard that they found a serial killer gene? If you guys haven't noticed, I study a lot about serial killers, so you'll hear a lot about them. But they think that they've identified a psychopath gene. Okay? Now, they also believe that there's a lot more people out there with the psychopath gene. Okay, but not everybody turns into a serial killer. Okay, so why? How come? But the thing is we're starting to see these things, and that's fantastic. We're seeing these genes and how they impact these disorders in our behaviors. Okay? So we're seeing a biological kind of impact of this, and it's fantastic. Let's see here. By identifying the genes underpinning mental activity and disorders, we're able to develop therapies based on genetic manipulation. Okay, because if we can fix the gene, we can fix the disorder, right? It's pretty awesome. Alright, I do want to remind you though that in almost all these biological kind of factors, because when we're talking about genes, there's a lot of biological factors and a lot of genes that play into these disorders. It's not just one. Okay? You have like, I don't know, sequences of genes and then your DNA and things like that. There's a lot that goes into it. So don't let me mislead you into believing it's just one gene. Okay, so let's talk about evolution. We talked a little bit about it on Wednesday. But I'm going to tell you that evolution is a very big part in psychology. Because we know that our brain has been evolutionized. Okay? Modern evolutionary theory has only recently begun to inform psychology. And the reason is because we are now able to look back and compare our behaviors and see which ones that we've taken with us, I guess you'd say, through evolution to survive. Okay, we're going to talk about it. Now, the brain adapts biologically, and we'll talk about that. But our brain chemistry is the same as it used to be, okay? We're not going to get into that so much in detail because that's way further down the line and further advanced classes. But we can see the differences biologically in our brain. But however, the mind adapts to cultural influences as well. And I will tell you, we'll get back into it here in just a little bit as well, is that our brain adapts culturally faster than it does biologically. Okay, I'll give you an example. When you guys first came to college, did you have to adapt? Right, yeah? Yeah, if you're the traditional student who came right after, high school, you now did not have that high school environment, right? Your teacher wasn't, John, your homework right now is going to be a check mark. How many of you guys would laugh at me if I came up to you and said, you're going to get a check mark if you don't finish your homework? I mean, that would be hilarious, right? We don't do that. So you had to, adjust this whole new environment. Okay? You also had to adjust and adapt to being more accountable, being more responsible. Your mom's not sitting there going, John, it's time to go to school, She just doesn't. Heck, she probably doesn't even know if she's in class, right? You have to adjust to this environment and this new culture, because college has a culture. Yes?
You are talking about microevolution, right, and not macroevolution, because microevolution is adaptation, but macroevolution is like changing it completely into something completely else.
You're right.
So it's microevolution, right?
Right. I think that we will be looking into macroevolution in biological terms. Okay, and the thing that's hard to explain about that is micro-macro, there's no set line of what determines micro-macro. You just have that gray area. You know what I'm talking about? So, it's in evolution, it's hard for some people to grasp because they don't necessarily, it's not part of one of their beliefs. So it's hard. But in this, I would say that we're talking more about micro. But we do get into some macro because we see the differences in brain chemistry, which is something that we're not going to get into in this course. Okay? Does that help a little bit? We're going to focus more on macro. Micro.
Okay.
Let me put it that way.
All right.
Okay. All right. So let's move on to adaptive problems. Because I'm talking about adaptations, right? So evolutionary theory, we use this to help explain our adaptations that we've made, both biologically and culturally. Okay, now here's something that's more present time that we've made to adapt. Has anybody heard of cheater detectors before? We have. Where they're saying that we have them. And I'm not talking about your boyfriend cheating on you or your girlfriend cheating on you. I'm talking about, let me ask this. Who's ever been a part of a group project? Everybody's been a part of a group project, yeah? Okay. Have you ever had that group member that just kind of did the leading out and got the good grade that you worked really hard to make sure your group got? The group member who just kind of sat there and was like, I might put a title on the paper, you know? Really didn't do anything. We have this innate kind of survival tactic now that we are able to detect these people who deplete or take advantage of our resources, who might inhibit us from getting our goals or achieving what we need to, okay? Or even having our resources, okay? I mean, you all know somebody. You're like, I don't know if I trust her. I wouldn't trust her as far as I could throw her. Right? We all know somebody like that. And a part of what this theory of evolution that we're talking about here is saying that we've developed this because it's our way of surviving. Because, today we have an abundance of food. I mean, yes, I know not everybody here in America does have an abundance of food, but as a whole, our country, we have an abundance of food. Okay, so we don't have to go out and hunt and gather and things like that. Okay, as they used to back in, history. We don't have to worry about these resources that they used to have to back in history and stuff like that. But now we have these other kind of resources like money, prestige, power, things like that, right? What if somebody jeopardizes your power? That's a resource you have, right? What if somebody jeopardizes that? You're able to detect it. Okay, we say that's part of the evolution of our mind. Now here's something else. Infants won't crawl over a cliff. Has anybody heard this before? Okay, my son must not have gotten this because he falls off the couch all the time. No, all the time, but anyways, what they did is they did this study where they had this huge box, like platform kind of thing, and they put babies on it, and it was really cool because it had clear plastic over the top, so the baby couldn't fall or anything like that. But, and I've got a picture of it next, so let me go ahead and just show the picture. Okay, so you see the one part, it's just normal, and then it shows this clip. There's plastic all the way through. Okay, so they're not going to fall. But they put their moms on the other end, and the mom's trying to coax them, and the baby won't do it. The baby has no idea about heights, right? I mean, how would they? So how do they know not to do it? It's an evolution of the mind. Okay? So we've adapted these mechanisms to make sure that we can survive. And we do it, like I say, culturally and biologically. Oops. Okay, there we go. No. Did I go really far? Jeez. Alright, so let's talk about our evolutionary heritage. Okay, so what we have to do is, in order to understand how we behave currently, we have to go back in time, right? We have to understand why we behaved a certain way before compared to now. Okay, and we see that these differences. Okay, so like here, modern humans were traced back to about 100,000 years ago. Okay, so Homo sapiens. And we see how a bunch of our current behaviors now reflect the survival behaviors that they had to have back then. Such as, we like sweet fatty foods, right? I mean, we do. Who doesn't want some candy every now and again? Cake, ice cream, all that fun stuff. We're like, yes, we treat ourselves with it. I mean, that's our reward. If we do really good on our diet for the week, we might get a huge Baskin Robbins bowl of ice cream. But with that, we see that these sweet fatty foods were like a survival treat almost. They didn't get it very much back in the day, but it was a mode of survival for them. If they got these sweet fatty foods, they weren't going to survive because they weren't going to starve. They could build up reserves and things like that, so they could go and have energy. They weren't just eating berries and nuts. They got to have these sweet fatty foods. And so we see these behaviors still stay in us. But they can have negative consequences, right? We can see that this might be a little bit maladaptive for us today now, because it can lead to obesity. Alright, but we see these different kinds of behaviors and how we continue with them because of our evolution. Alright, some behaviors do not reflect our evolutionary heritage, such as driving, reading books, and things like that. Okay? Our Homo sapien ancestors from 100,000 years ago didn't need to drive or read, right, to survive. We didn't see that. Okay, so let's move forward. Do I have any questions so far? Okay, dokie. Oh, sorry. Alright, I'm going to try and really rush here. Alright, so culture provides adaptive solutions. Culture really helps us learn how to react to different things and ways and stuff like that, right? Okay, culture kind of gives us a map of how we should react to things and behave. Social interaction gives rise to culture, which is transmitted from one generation to the next through learning. We learn our culture. Okay? Culture affects thought and behavior, such as your preferences for music, food, holidays, traditions, beliefs, values, all those things are impacted by culture. Let's see, cultural rules reflect adaptive solutions towards having generations. And cultural neuroscience. It studies the way that culture impacts the brain, the mind, the genes, and ultimately our behavior. Okay? So why, you might like jazz music and I might like punk rock or something like that, we look at culture and stuff in there too to see if there's an impact. Okay? Same with the reasons why we like different foods and things like that and why we behave differently. So here's a picture called family, modern family, and their culture kind of coming out today, right? We can see that, can't we? Technology is a very big part of our culture. So is working, okay? We've got the kids studying here and eating breakfast. College is a big part of our national culture. Would you agree? Yeah, education is a huge part of our culture here in college, or here in America. Okay? We can see how culture has changed our behaviors just recently. Okay? I think I talked about this last semester. When I was sitting in this very classroom, I would not be on my smartphone because guess what? We didn't have anything. Okay? I thought it was really cool for having the phone that lit up on the spikes. And ours has a green screen. It did not have colors to it. So we weren't texting people. We weren't looking on Facebook. In fact, here's another culture change. When I came to college, Facebook was still coming out, or first coming out, and you had to have a college email to even join up. Anybody remember that? No? Yeah, a couple? Okay. You had to have a college email to join Facebook. Now anybody can do it. Okay? That's changed our culture immensely. Would you agree? Okay, so we see a lot of recent changes just by technology and things like that, and that impacts our behaviors. We also see it's not universal. Okay, this is also a modern picture of a family. Okay, and you can see the cultures totally different, right? Alright, so we're seeing the differences in how we interact and behave. Okay, they're more dependent on each other. The picture previous, not so much. They're more independent. We see all these differences. Alright, so I got about 5 minutes left. Good. Alright, so let's talk about the cross levels of analysis in psychology. Alright, we talked about culture, we talked about biology, psychology is all about the individual. And, social levels and things like that. So this is how we really study differences in psychology in the way that it impacts us. Okay? We can take most things and study them on these different levels. Okay, the biological level of analysis, we're obviously looking at the physical body, like the brain, and how it contributes to our mind. Okay, so our genes, the chemicals and substances in our brain. How does that biological determinant impact our behaviors and things like that? Okay? And we have the individual level of analysis. Okay, and that's how our differences in personality, our differences in intelligence levels, our differences in our preferences and things like that. Okay? So we study things on a level of that way. Then we have the social level of analysis, okay? And that's how, group context and group interactions, or social interactions, impact our behaviors, our thoughts and beliefs and things like that. And then we have the cultural level of analysis, okay? We study how our culture impacts our behaviors, beliefs, thoughts, feelings, emotions, all that stuff. And for example, because I know when I was first learning this, I'm like, how the hell is one thing you can analyze on all this stuff? Well, something as easy as music, okay? And your book actually breaks it down into the different levels. But we can see on a biological level how music impacts our brain and the chemicals in our brain, okay? Such as for sports games, when they're playing the hyped up music, the warm-ups, the players are like, yeah, let's get it, we're powered up. The fans are sitting in the stands getting all excited. Okay, Eye of the Tiger comes on, everybody goes nuts, right? Okay, hyped up. We can see differences in your brain chemicals right there, okay? You're listening to slow music, okay, it changes the chemicals in your brain. And it triggers different sections of your brain, okay? Individual level of analysis. Does it make you happy? Do you prefer slow music compared to really fast music? That kind of thing. Social level. Just like if that music got the crowd hyped up, right? If it didn't get me hyped up and you hyped up and you hyped up, would you get hyped up? Probably not, right? So we study that in the cultural level of analysis. What different music goes with different cultures? Okay, what's your preference there because of your culture? Alright, so let's talk, and there it's broken down a little bit for you too. There's your brain on music. Alright, so last slide here, guys. Let's talk about the different subfields of psychology. Alright, so these three listed here are some of the more rare fields that people go into. That's your forensic, sports, and health psychologists. But let me read off this list to you of different subfields of psychology. You have your neuroscience and biological psychologist, cognitive psychologist, general experimental psychologist, developmental psychologist, personality psychologist, social, cultural, clinical, counseling, school, industrial, and organizational. I'm telling you guys, if you go to psychology, I dealt with the thing. Now, I'm not a psychologist. I am a social worker. But even in my field, and like I said, I've got a degree in sociology, but even in my field, after I got my degree in psychology social worker, I still had to sit there and say, what am I going to be when I grow up? Because there's so many subfields in decision making. And if you go into psychology, you will also have to decide on a subfield and ask yourself, what are you going to be when you grow up? Okay? Do I have any questions? Okay, remember, no class on Monday. Email me if you need a copy of the syllabus as soon